I'm in that Orthodox
Bible.
Bible. Orthodox means original. We in the first books of the Maccabees. Judas fights the Gentiles at Emmaus in chapter 4, verse 1. The Maccabees. Then Gorgias took 5,000 men and 1,000 choice cavalries, and the army marched out by night to descend upon the camp of the Judeans and strike them suddenly. Young men from the citadel served as his guides, but Judas got word of it. He and his soldiers marched out to strike the king's army at Emmaus, while his forces were dispersed from the camp. When Gorgias came into the camp of Judas at night, he found no one, so he sought them in the mountains, saying, "These are fleeing from us." And at first light Judas was seen on the plain with 3,000 men, but they did not have armor and swords as they wished. They saw the Gentiles camped with strong fortifications, surrounded by cavalry trained for battle. But Judas said to his men, "Do not be afraid for our numbers or for their attack. Remember how our fathers were saved in the Red Sea, when Pharaoh pursued them with his army. Remember, so now, let us cry out to heaven to see if the Lord will be with us, and remember the covenant of our fathers and Cush and these forces before us this day. Then all the nations will know that he is the Redeemer and Savior of Israel." So the Gentiles lifted their eyes and saw them coming opposite them, and they departed from their camp and went into battle. And then those with Judas surrounded the trumpets, and thus they meet, and the foreigners were crushed, fleeing into the plain. All those remaining fell by the sword. They pursued them as far as Gazara, as far as the plain of Idumah, and Azotus, and Jamina, and about 3,000 of their men fell. Then Judas and his army returned from pursuing them, and he said to the people, "Do not desire the spoils, for the battle is before us. Gorgias and his army are in the mountains nearby, but stand firm before our enemies and battle them, and afterwards take the spoils boldly." While Judas was finishing these words, an enemy detachment was seen peeping out from the mountains, and they saw that their army had been put to flight, and that the Judeans set their camp of the fire, for the smoke that has seen revealed what happened. When they became aware of this, they were very afraid, and when they observed the forces of Judas prepared for battle in the plain, they fled to the regions of the Philistines. Judas returned to take spoils from their camp. They took massive amounts of gold and silver, and cloth dyed blue and purple in abundant wealth. As they returned from battle, they sang hymns and blessed heaven, because the Lord is good, and for his mercy endures forever. Thus great deliverance happened to Israel on that day. But all the Gentiles who escaped went and reported to Lysias everything that had happened. And when he heard this, he was bewildered and disheartened, because things had not happened to Israel as he wished, and he had not turned out as the king commanded him. Restoration of the temple. Always rebuilding that temple. Chapter 4, verse 36. So Judas and his brother with him said, "Behold, our foes have been crushed. Let us go up to purify the sanctuary and renew it." And thus the entire camp gathered and ascended to Mount Zion. They saw there the sanctuary deserted, the altar desecrated, the doors burned down, and in the country yard they found that bushes had grown up to the wooden area. And on one of the mountains they also saw the priest's quarter in ruins. So they tore their garments and laminated greatly, sprinkled themselves with ashes. They fell on their faces on the earth and sounded the signal on the trumpets and cried to heaven. Then Judas ordered his men to fight those in the citadels until he purified the sanctuary. He chose righteous priests devoted to the law. They purified the sanctuary and carried the defiled stones to an unclean place, and they discussed what they should do with the altars of the whole burnt offering, which had been desecrated. It seemed to them the best plan was to tear it down, so it would not be reproached to them because the Gentiles had corrupted it. So they tore down the altars. They also stacked the stones in appropriate locations on the temple hill until the prophets would come and tell what they should be done with them. And then they took uncut stones according to the law and constructed a new altar like the one before. They also repaired the sanctuary, the inside of the temple, and consecrated the courtyard, and they made new holy vessels and carried the lampstands, the altars, and incense, and the tables into the temple. They burnt incense on the altars and lit the lights in the lampstands, and these gave lights inside the temple. And then they set bread on the table, and they hung up the curtains, completed all the tasks they had begun. They rose early in the mornings of the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month of Chislev, in the 148th year, and offered sacrifices according to the law in the new altars of whole burnt offerings which they made. It was consecrated with songs and harps and lutes and cymbals, and at the time on the day of the Gentiles had desecrated it, all the people fell down and worshipped and blessed heaven, which had prospered them. They celebrated the consecrations of the altar for the 8 days, and they offered whole burnt offerings with gladness, and sacrifices of peace offerings and thanks offerings, and they also adorned the faces of the temple with crowns of gold, small shields, and restored the gates in the priest's quarters, and installed doors. There was a great gladness among the people, and the disgrace of the Gentiles was removed. Then Judas and his brothers and the congregations of Israel decided that each year at the time the days of the consecration of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness for 8 days, 8 full days, beginning on the 25th of the month of Chislev. At this time they also built high walls, strong tower around the Mount Zion, lest the Gentiles come and destroy these things as they had done before. And then he stationed an army there to guard it, and he fortified the town of Beth-zor, and so the people would have a fortress that faced Idumea. Quick study, chapter 4, verse 8. But Judas said to his men, "Do not be afraid of their numbers or their attack. Remember how our fathers were saved in the Red Sea." Chapter 4, verse 8 through 11. Beyond his military prowess, Judas was a spiritual leader of his people as well. Quick study, chapter 4, verse 52 through 59. Hanukkah. Judas and his followers celebrated the first festival of rededication, which the historians Josephus calls the Festival of Lights. The celebration lasted 8 days, beginning on the 25th of Chislev, December. Today the festival is called Hanukkah, and its lit is dedication. It celebrates with the lighting of the Hanukkah lamp, according to the Babylonian Talmud, and was found only undefiled container oil. The temple lasted for 8 full days. We got Hanukkah right there. What?